They always lowered their voices when I entered a room, as if pity were a secret that needed whispering. It had a sound soft, wet, apologetic, the kind of sound people make when they talk about the weather at a funeral. I learned to hear it before I saw faces. The breath caught halfway in a throat. The pause at the end of a sentence. The scrape of a chair pushed back so someone could make way for my wheels. The world rearranged itself around me after the accident, like furniture in a house you no longer recognize, and everyone insisted it was still home. I remember the last day I walked, not because it was special, but because it was ordinary. Coffee gone lukewarm on the counter, a window open to the smell of rain-soaked pavement. A message from my mother reminding me to buy lemons. I remember laughing at something insignificant, a laugh that had weight and height and legs. I didn't know then that a laugh can change its gait, that after the impact, after the metal, after the leaning siren, it would have to learn to sit down with me and stay. People think grief is only for death, but it has cousin shock, fear, the long ache of before. My body grieved and healed and learned a new alphabet. My hands became my feet, my shoulders became my hips. The chair cold, stubborn, mine became both prison and passport. Some mornings, the first push is an admission. Other mornings, it is an anthem. When Ethan proposed, it was raining. The stones on the path behind the little church carried the smell of moss and old prayers. He held my hands and told me he loved me. Said love was not diminished by what we lost. He was shaking, and I told myself it was because he wanted me, needed me, believed in me. Later, I would recognize the shake for what it was, a man balancing an idea of himself on a beam too narrow to stand on. His mother called the next day. She didn't say congratulations. She asked about logistics, ramps, seating, whether the aisle could be managed discreetly. Discreetly, I pictured a veil that covered not my face but my chair, something white and heavy to erase the shape of me. When I said we could work with the church to make everything accessible, she cleared her throat and said she hoped the ceremony would remain elegant. I told her accessibility and elegance are not enemies. She didn't answer. I tried on dresses in rooms designed for bodies that never meet thresholds. Mirrors widened me, narrowed me, rearranged me. The women in the boutique smiled the way people smile when they want a tip and an easy story to tell at dinner. We had to move the mannequins to fit me through. I apologized. I apologized for existing in a way that required shifting weight. The seamstress lowered her voice and told me she would add support in the bodice. Extra structure to keep me upright for photographs. I wanted to say, I have been upright for 2 years. You just haven't learned how to see it. There is a particular cruelty to the way people think they are kind. They ask if you need help without waiting for an answer, then resent you for accepting it. They pray for you, then talk to you as if you are the prayer. They say brave when they mean inconvenient, inspiring when they mean don't make me uncomfortable. I grew a small garden of polite answers and watered it daily. Ethan was gentlest at night. When the lights were off and his voice forgot to perform, he would trace the line of my collarbone, settle his cheek on my shoulder, and tell me we'd figure it out. I believed him because I wanted to, because wanting felt like motion. In the day, he had a different tone, the tone of a foreman on a site that keeps failing inspections. Timelines, budget, vendor calls, arrangements. He would start sentences that made my chest tighten. When you're up there, if we can get you down the aisle might be tricky. I never asked him to carry me. I refused to rehearse humiliation to comfort fear that wasn't mine. I practiced the aisle alone. When no one could turn the word into a verdict. The church was empty in the afternoons. A cool, quiet place that forgot your name and remembered your pulse. I learned the angle of entry, the grade of the ramp, the breath I needed to hold before the first push. I counted the boards beneath the carpeted in a cross, 12 down, and mapped out where the floor softened with age. My palms blistered in half moons. My forearms sang. I measured the exact distance between the door and the altar, then doubled it in my mind to leave room for the weight of their eyes. Sometimes Father Mateo would find me there, his keys rattling like a small confession. He never fussed. He asked if I liked the afternoon light. He said it made everything honest. One Friday, he rolled the rug back with me and we talked about friction like it was theology. Strength isn't just in the arms, he said, tapping his chest. It's in how much of you decides to move. I told him I wanted to descend the aisle without help. He nodded, not as permission but as witness. Word travels quickly in small towns, especially words with wheels. At the bakery, a woman I had never met touched my forearm and said, "He is a saint." At the pharmacy, a man told me he would pray that my groom always had the patience you require. At the dress fitting, a stranger whispered, "She must be such a burden," and didn't notice I was 3 feet away, all burden and ears. I pretended not to hear. I learned that pretending is a kind of violence you inflict on yourself to keep other people comfortable. My mother visited every Thursday. She made soup that tasted like a long time ago, and ironed napkins, she insisted, were unlucky if left wrinkled. She never spoke about the accident. She never asked what I could no longer do. She asked instead if I wanted roses or eucalyptus in the bouquet, if I preferred gold ribbon or linen, if the lace should be hand-stitched because machines are loud and weddings should be quiet. She is the kind of woman who turns pain into a chore and survives by crossing it off a list. Before she left each time, she would kneel so our eyes were level and say, "You owe nobody ease. Not even me." We met Ethan's family for dinner a month before the date. His mother wore pearls with the confidence of a verdict. His sister, Bianca, looked at my chair like a riddle and then at her phone like an answer. The restaurant had 2 steps at the entrance, a small oversight that required a large humiliation. The manager brought a portable ramp. 2 busboys held their breath while I rolled up. One miscalculated and put his hand on my back, as if I were furniture that might slide. I thanked him because the night needed saving and the saving wouldn't come from them. His mother ordered for the table. She used the word light 17 times. When the bread came, she placed it at the far end, as if carbs might leap into my lap, uninvited. She asked about the aisle again. She suggested a side entrance, so the processional feels natural. I placed my napkin on my lap and considered the shape of natural. Ethan said nothing. He watched the condensation on his glass and traced circles with his thumb. Later, in the car, he said he hated confrontation. I said I hated being made into a problem. We both looked out the window and pretended the night had been ordinary. I dreamt that week of a different aisle, not the church, but a supermarket, bright and indifferent, where I could move through space without narration. I woke up thirsty and poured water in the dark, listening to the house hold its breath. The dress arrived on a Wednesday, satin that didn't glare, lace that felt like language instead of costume. We fitted it to the chair, not as compromise, but as collaboration. I asked the seamstress to leave the train short, no trailing proof required. I chose a veil that framed, not concealed. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not what was missing but what was present. A woman whose life did not end where her waist met aluminum. Ethan picked up his suit the same day. He sent a photo of himself in a dressing room mirror, smiling like a man who wanted to believe his smile. "We're going to be okay," he texted. I stared at the words until they blurred. Okay is a small country with strict borders. Love deserves a continent. 2 days before the ceremony, the florist called to confirm delivery. She asked where the aisle arrangements should go. "Both sides," I said, surprising myself. "High, but not so high they feel like guards." She laughed and said she understood. She has hands that smell like patience. That evening, I went to the church at dusk. The stained glass held the last light of the day like a secret you tell once and keep forever. I practiced the first 10 feet of the aisle, then the next, then the pause where I imagined music would fill my mistakes. On the final run, I didn't think I just moved. The wheels found their line. My breath found its count. And the space between doors and altar felt like a sentence I had always known how to say. When I reached the front, I turned to face the empty pews and let the silence name me. In the second row on the left, a woman's scarf had been abandoned, soft and red, the color of a decision. I imagined shoulders, whispers, the rustle of programs, the unkind breath of those who came to see whether courage can be elegant. I imagined Ethan's face, and the faces beside his. As I reached the front, Ethan extended his hand. I looked at it for a long second. His eyes pleaded, not with love, but with fear. The fear of spectacle. The fear that I might make him look small, so I didn't take it. Instead, I stopped beside him, lifted my chin, and said clearly enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "I got here on my own." A murmur swept through the crowd. Bianca's jaw tightened. His mother looked like she might faint. And for the first time since the accident, I felt the air bend toward me, not in pity, but in awe. Father Mateo began the ceremony, but his words blurred into a hum behind my thoughts. Every vow, every prayer, every promise sounded hollow now, too small for what I had built out of pain and defiance. Ethan's hand trembled as he repeated the words. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I watched him, realizing with startling clarity that I had arrived at this moment not because of him, but despite him. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Silence filled the space, like breath before thunder. Then, softly, I said, "I promise to honor truth, wherever it leads." It wasn't the vow they'd written for me, but it was mine. After the ceremony, applause broke out, polite, cautious, but from somewhere near the back, A single pair of hands clapped harder, faster. It was Father Mateo. His face was wet with tears. And then others joined, a slow ripple of sound growing into something almost holy. Outside, as the bells rang and petals fell like snow, Ethan reached for me again. "Why didn't you say the words?" he asked under his breath. "Because I meant mine," I said simply. He stared at me, confusion and shame flickering behind his eyes. "You're embarrassing us." I laughed, a sound that startled even me. "No, Ethan, you did that when you stopped loving me and called it devotion." He stepped back, face pale. Around us, guests pretended not to listen but couldn't look away. I turned toward the ramp leading down the church steps. The wind lifted my veil like a flag. My mother stood waiting at the bottom, hands clasped, tears shining in her eyes, the first I'd ever seen her shed. I descended slowly, each movement deliberate. The sound of the wheels on stone echoed louder than the bells above. By the time I reached her, silence had fallen across the courtyard. She bent down, pressed her forehead to mine, and whispered, "You walked taller than any bride I've ever seen." The photographer approached timidly. "Should we still take the couple's photos?" I smiled at him, at all of them, and said, "Take one, just me." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "More than ever." He lifted the camera. I turned toward the light, away from the crowd, away from Ethan. The shutter clicked, the sound of something ending and beginning at the same time. Later, when everyone had left, I returned to the church. The aisle was empty again, the ramp glowing faintly in the last light of dusk. I rolled halfway down and stopped, listening to the echo of my own movement. It was the sound of freedom. I looked up at the altar one last time and whispered, "You called me a burden, but I carried myself here, and I'll carry myself wherever I go next." Outside, the wind lifted the veil from my shoulders. I let it go. It floated away, white, bright, weightless, like the past, finally learning how to leave. I let my hand fall. Back in my room, I looked again at the dress. It hung there, shimmering in the half-dark, innocent of everything it symbolized. For the first time, I saw it not as a promise, but as a question. I turned off the lamp, but sleep didn't come. The night stretched long and sleepless, filled with thoughts that sounded like the slow creak of a door being pushed open, the sound of a choice forming. Tomorrow, they would all see the bride they pitied, but what they didn't know was that I was already planning my escape. The morning of the day before my wedding arrived, gray and quiet, like the world had drawn a curtain over itself. The air smelled of rain again, the same kind of rain that fell the night Ethan proposed. It should have felt poetic, but it didn't. It felt circular, as if I had spent all this time pushing through storms only to find myself back at the same starting line. The house was a blur of movement and chatter. Voices came from every direction, vendors, deliveries, relatives who had flown in early. Every sound pressed against me like too tight fabric. They spoke about me but never to me. I was the bride, a symbol, a role, a fragile thing to be maneuvered carefully around, so no one got caught in the wreckage of my reality. Ethan's mother, elegant as ever in her cream blouse and judgment, fluttered through the hallways giving orders disguised as suggestions. "The seating chart must change, Elise," she said. "We can't have the photographers obstructed by logistics." Logistics, that was me now, a moving inconvenience. When I entered the dining room for breakfast, she smiled with all the warmth of a bank manager. "Good morning, dear," she said. "Try to rest today. Tomorrow will be emotional." I smiled back because that's what civility demands when truth would burn too brightly. "Yes," I said. "Emotional." Ethan joined later, his tie loose, his eyes tired. He kissed my forehead, not affectionately, but dutifully. There was something heavy between us, something unspoken but visible, like a crack beneath polished marble. He spoke about the photographer, about the weather forecast, about the charity his firm might donate to in lieu of favors, but he didn't ask how I felt. He didn't notice the tremor in my hands. Or maybe he did and chose not to. "Everything's coming together," he said, with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It'll be a day to remember." "For who?" I asked softly. He blinked, confused. "For us." The word us tasted foreign on his tongue, like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. That afternoon, Elise insisted on a final rehearsal in the church, just to make sure the flow feels natural. The word natural had started to sound like a joke. When we arrived, I noticed new decorations, white drapes, gold ribbons, tall arrangements of lilies lining the platform. It was beautiful, yes, but sterile, cold, the kind of beauty that photographs well but feels like a lie when you touch it. Father Mateo greeted us with a soft smile. "Almost ready, my child." he asked. Almost, I said, still learning how to breathe. He laughed gently, unaware of the truth embedded in my words. During the run-through, Ethan kept glancing at his phone. His mother kept adjusting my position, directing the photographer's test shots. A little more to the left. Dear, we don't want the chair to block the altar. The chair. Always the chair. Never me. Afterward, when everyone left to check on the reception hall, I stayed behind in the pews. The church was quiet again, empty except for the sound of rain hitting the stained glass. I sat there for a long time, staring at the ramp, that gleaming white stage I never asked for. I closed my eyes and imagined myself on it tomorrow, rolling forward in front of them all. Their eyes would follow me, not because of love, but because of curiosity dressed as compassion. I could hear their thoughts already. Poor thing, so brave, so sad, and suddenly, I knew I couldn't do it, not like that. When I returned home, the house was full of laughter, the kind that didn't belong to me. From the study, I heard Ethan's voice, low, tense, speaking to someone. The door was slightly ajar. I shouldn't have listened, but the sound pulled me in like a thread tugging at an old wound. I know, he was saying, I know it's complicated. A pause. No, it's not about pity. It's about responsibility. She needs me. My stomach turned. The woman's voice on the other end, soft, distant, familiar. Bianca, Ethan. She said quietly, you don't owe her your life. Everyone would understand. I made a promise, he said. She depends on me. A promise, not love, not devotion, obligation dressed up in vows. There was a long silence. Then her voice again, gentle, persuasive. If you stay with her, you'll resent her. And she know. You already sound like you do. He didn't deny it. The quiet between their breaths told me everything I needed to know. I rolled back before he could see me. My heart was a wild thing in my chest, beating against the bars of a cage I had spent years polishing. I reached the hallway and stopped near the window, my reflection fractured by the raindrops on the glass. My makeup had smudged, though I hadn't cried yet. My lips were trembling anyway. The truth was simple, brutal, and oddly liberating. Ethan didn't love me anymore. Maybe he never truly had. He loved the version of himself who could love someone like me, the savior, the patient fiancé, the man with the story worth applause. But when the applause faded, when the reality of my body replaced the fantasy of his virtue, he realized the price of that story was too high, and I realized I was done being anyone's redemption arc. That night, I didn't join the dinner. I told Elise I wasn't feeling well. She fussed, suggested chamomile, rest, lavender oil. I nodded and closed my door. The quiet that followed was sacred. I lit one candle on the desk and placed the dress beside it. The silk gleamed like water, too pure for the hands that would hold it tomorrow. I thought about running, disappearing before dawn, leaving a note, letting them build whatever story they needed to survive the scandal. But something deeper, quieter, told me not to. No. I would show up, but not as the woman they pitied. Not as the bride whose love required permission. I would show up as the storm they thought was silence. At midnight, the rain stopped. The world went still, holding its breath for morning. I opened the window and let the cold air in. Somewhere, a clock struck 12, a clean line between what I had been and what I was about to become. I sat by the window until dawn, tracing circles on the wheel rims with my fingers. My palms were rough now, lined with calluses that had carried me further than any man ever had. Tomorrow, they would expect a fragile bride. Tomorrow, they would see fire instead. The morning of the wedding came wrapped in a deceptive calm. The sky was an impossible blue, too bright, too untroubled for what it was about to witness. The wind smelled faintly of jasmine and rain-soaked earth, like the world itself had been washed clean overnight, preparing for a story that would not go as planned. My mother helped me dress in silence. Her hands were steady, her lips pressed thin, the only sign that she was holding herself together with invisible thread. When she buttoned the final clasp at my back, she whispered, "Remember, you walk toward no one, you walk toward yourself." I looked at her reflection in the mirror, the woman who raised me with iron grace, who never cried where I could see. I wanted to say something brave, something that would make her proud, but all I managed was a nod. The veil rested across my shoulders like a ghost's hand. Downstairs, the guests were already gathering. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the murmur of polite conversation, the rustle of expensive fabric. My mother kissed the top of my head, straightened my veil, and said, "Let them see your strength, not because you owe it to them, but because they'll never understand it." When we arrived at the church, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering colors across the polished floor like fragments of some ancient promise. The white ramp gleamed under the light, sterile, artificial, a symbol of everything I hadn't asked for but would now claim as my own. Elise rushed over, clipboard in hand, chirping instructions that fell away as soon as they reached me. Ethan stood at the altar, pale and nervous, adjusting his cup. His mother whispered something to him that made him nod but not smile. I saw Bianca in the front row, eyes sharp as a blade, her phone clutched in her lap like a weapon of convenience. Father Mateo approached, his kind eyes searching mine. "Are you ready?" I smiled. "More than you think." The organ began, soft, reverent, predictable. Everyone rose, heads turned, whispers rippled through the pews like a small wind before a storm. And then I moved. Not because someone pushed me, not because someone guided me, because I chose to. The sound of my wheels against the ramp filled the church. It was rhythmic, steady metal and wood singing together, like a hymn rewritten. The veil trailed behind me, a soft shimmer that refused to be tragic. I looked up, not at Ethan, not at the altar, but at the faces around me. The pity was still there, yes, but now it looked uncertain, unsettled, because I wasn't shrinking beneath it, I was rising. Halfway down, I paused. It wasn't part of the plan, but neither was I. "Are you all right?" Elise whispered from the side. I smiled. "Perfectly." Then I kept going, slower now, deliberate, like each turn of the wheel was a declaration that I would not be erased. On my way out, in the vestibule, I heard voices, low, urgent, familiar. "She'll make it about herself," Bianca said. "It always is." His mother's reply landed like a paper cut. "He is too good for this. He will spend his life pushing." There was a pause, one heartbeat, two, the small hush in which futures make their choices. Ethan's voice followed, soft and exhausted. "Please, not now. Not now. Not never. Not wrong. Not stop." I waited until they left before I moved. I rolled the ramp back in place, steadied the door with my palm, and went out into the evening where the sky wore its last blue like a bruise. I sat for a long time under the oak, counting leaves the way people count rosary beads. A breeze turned the pages of the next hours fitful, persistent. I thought of my mother, ironing luck into napkins. I thought of Father Mateo rolling back the rug. I thought of a dress that fit a life and a life that deserved a ceremony. They called me a burden. They said it carefully, with concern, with a garnish of virtue, but the word is too heavy to hold with 2 fingers. It falls and bruises the hand that drops it. That night I slept without dreaming. When morning came, I practiced again. The aisle was exactly the same length as the day before, and so was my certainty. I could feel the day approaching like a train you hear before you see, metal on metal, a promise that sounds like danger until it becomes arrival. I did not know yet whether I would roll toward Ethan or toward the door. I only knew this, when the music began, and the back pews turned like weather vanes, I would move under my own power. I would descend the aisle alone, not because there was no one to push me, but because the only person who gets to decide how I enter a room is the person who has to live there after everyone leaves. Outside, the town woke and slow, ordinary ways, milk on porches, dogs negotiating fences, a child tugging at a sleeve asking if clouds can drown. I brewed coffee. I answered my mother's text about eucalyptus with, "Yes," and 3 lemons. I folded the veil into a shape that understood my face. I ran my palms along the wheels and felt the calluses that have been building an argument for 2 years. They were my evidence, my vows, my rings. The pity would be there on the day. So would the pearls and the whispers and the side glances. So would the aisle. The one that counted breaths and boards and brightness exactly the same for every bride, no matter what pushed her forward. So would I, when the church bell struck 9. It sounded like a declaration. I turned toward the door and whispered to the morning, as much to test the words as to believe them. "I am not the burden. I am the bride." And the day, hearing me, began. The morning light came in thin and golden, spilling across the dress where it hung against the closet door. It looked almost weightless in the sun, white, soft, unbothered by what waited beneath it. I sat in bed watching how it moved with the draft, and for a strange second, I envied the fabric. It didn't know what people said. It didn't care about pity. It only existed to shine. Downstairs, the house buzzed with the dull hum of preparation, phones ringing, voices crossing, plans being made without asking if I still wanted them. The wedding planner, an eager woman named Elise with too much perfume and not enough tact, had arrived early. She greeted me the way people greet patients recovering from anesthesia, slow, careful, with a kind of forced brightness. "Oh my dear, "You look radiant," she said, as though radiance were a charity she could hand out. I thanked her. Because that's what you do when kindness hides its condescension behind pearls and clipboard smiles. The day's agenda was printed and color-coded: cake delivery, photographer setup, florist arrival, rehearsal dinner seating. Each line, each task, each note was like a little reminder that the world still expected me to play the part of a bride. Quiet, graceful, grateful, except I wasn't sure if I wanted to play at all anymore. Ethan came in late that morning. His hair was damp, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He'd gone for a run. The kind of thing he did when he needed to remind himself that his life still belonged to him. I watched from across the room as he scrolled through messages, avoiding my eyes. "They're delivering the flowers early," he said finally. "That's fine," I answered. He looked at me then, almost startled by my calm. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" "I've been nervous for 2 years," I said. "Tomorrow just makes it official." He smiled weakly, then leaned down and kissed my forehead like one might kiss a sleeping child. "Everything will be perfect," he murmured, but his voice trembled around the word perfect like it had thorns. At the rehearsal later that afternoon, I learned that the aisle had been adjusted without my consent. The small wooden ramp Father Mateo and I had designed, simple, sturdy, beautiful in its honesty, had been replaced with a long white platform that looked like a fashion show runway. Elise called it elegant accessibility. I called it a performance. When I asked where the original ramp had gone, she said, "Oh, we moved it. The photos will look much better this way." I wanted to tell her that elegance built on erasure is just another form of cruelty, but the words caught in my throat. Ethan stood beside her, looking guilty but silent. His silence had become a language lately, one I was fluent in but tired of translating. As I rolled forward for the practice procession, I caught whispers behind me. Bianca and her mother, their voices sugar-coated but sharp. "She insists on doing it alone." "Yes. Stubborn pride. It'll make everyone so uncomfortable." "She loves attention, doesn't she?" I stopped at the third pew, the sound of their voices ringing louder than the organ that wasn't playing yet. Father Mateo walked up to me, his eyes kind but knowing. "Would you like to stop for today?" he asked. "No," I said. "If they're going to stare, I might as well give them something to see." I rolled forward again, slower this time, steady, deliberate, the sound of my wheels against the polished floor echoing through the church. That echo became my heartbeat, my declaration. When I reached the altar, I looked back at them, at Ethan, at his mother, at everyone who had already decided what I was supposed to represent. Their pity was a mirror, and I refused to see myself in it. Dinner that night was worse. The Davenport estate glowed with candles and laughter that didn't belong to me. Elise had transformed the dining hall into a magazine spread, white roses, gold trim, everything soft enough to hide tension. I sat at the long table, a guest at my own rehearsal dinner. Ethan gave a toast, thanking everyone for their support, his voice shaking as he said support like it was an apology. His mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin she didn't need. When he mentioned my strength, the room clapped. I hated that word. Strength had become their favorite way of calling me broken. After the toast, people came to me in waves. They complimented my courage. They told me how inspiring I was. One woman even said she wished she had my determination, as though she could borrow it like sugar at some point. I stopped hearing words. I watched mouths move, hands gesture, eyes flick down to the chair, then back up to my face, quick as guilt. I excused myself, rolled toward the veranda, and let the night swallow me. The air outside smelled like salt and rain. I could hear laughter through the glass, the easy kind of laughter that comes from people who've never been stared at like a tragedy. Then I heard voices behind the curtain. "She'll never be able to keep up," Bianca said. "She doesn't need to," her mother replied. "Ethan will have to slow down for the rest of his life." What a waste. The word waste landed on me like cold ash. I wanted to burst in and tell them everything I had carried, every night I had stayed up relearning my body, every bruise, every scar. Every morning, I forced myself to smile so they wouldn't see the exhaustion. I wanted to tell them that I was not a waste. I was a miracle they didn't deserve to witness. Instead, I turned my chair toward the garden. I rolled into the dark until their laughter faded behind me. The moonlight made the grass shimmer silver. I stopped by the fountain, my reflection bending and breaking with the ripples. In that quiet, I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I was afraid of staying. I imagined the aisle again, the white ramp, the whispers, the waiting faces. But in that image, I wasn't moving toward Ethan. I was moving toward the door, toward air, toward myself. My hands gripped the wheels, cold and steady. I whispered to the night, to the water, to the stars that looked like 1,000 open eyes. If strength means pretending, then I don't want it. I just want to be free. The fountain bubbled back softly, like a voice, agreeing. When I returned to the house, everyone had gone to bed. The hallway lights glowed dim and golden, the kind of light that makes even lies look gentle. I stopped outside Ethan's room, listened to the sound of his breathing, steady, calm, I almost knocked, but my hand hesitated mid-air. What would I say? That love shouldn't feel like shrinking. That pity, no matter how softly spoken, still burns when it touches the skin.